installment of my alchemy series, dealing specifically with Spagyrics. Just realized my fan is still on, so I'll turn that off. As you can see here, I have an improvised fume hood for doing my alchemical experiments. The reason I have that is because sometimes I deal with substances that are a little bit more hazardous for my health. So you can't see it in the frame, but I have an improvised stash up top here, and a powerful 6-inch duct fan which vents everything outside when needed. I just kind of got into the habit of running the fan all the time, although in a lot of cases you don't really need it. So anyways, in the last clip I had shown a table with a bunch of different glass equipment that can be used when working Spagyrics or alchemy, and I went over some of the basic flask types, the condensers, the distillation adapters, thermometers, all that kind of stuff. In this video I'm just going to briefly go over sort of the process for rectifying a spirit, specifically a spirit of wine. Now the reason why I'm deciding to go over a spirit of wine video is because in my experience, and for many other Spagyrics out there will testify to this fact, that alcohol is an excellent extraction medium for working with plants, and specifically wine alcohol or grape alcohol is really good for that. The reason for that, to be honest, it's hard for me to prove this to anybody, but there is a lot of common knowledge basically saying that grapes and wine have healing properties, that it has a high vibratory frequency. Even the spirits of wine have been known historically as eau de vie, or water of life. And the quality of alcohol that you get from a wine is higher than many other types. However, from a chemist standpoint, ethanol is ethanol, and so you can make your own conclusions about that. I'm not saying you can't use other types of alcohols to distill your spirits at all. I'm not going to make that disclaimer, because I think ultimately your intention means more than where you actually got the alcohol from. I just, for myself, like to stick with what the older authors recommended and what I tend to like working with, which is wine. Also, on a dollar for dollar basis, if you're purchasing wine from the store, at least in Canada, you're actually getting more alcohol content than you are from almost anything else in the store. So that's another reason to consider it. So what I have here is a basic distillation setup. I have a round bottom flask with a flat bottom, so it makes better contact on my hot plate. I have a hot plate. I have a standard distillation train. Okay, so we have a distillation adapter, we have a thermometer so we can watch what our boiling point is sitting at. We have a standard Liebig condenser here. I think this one's 300 millimeters. So the longer the condenser is, the better it can catch things. Essentially, it has more surface area contact point for the water to cool it. Then we have a vacuum takeoff adapter into a 500 ml round bottom flask, which you can't really see because of this other retort I have set up here, which is not the subject of this video, but I didn't want to move it because it's another process I have going on. So yeah, so this is a basic distillation tray. I have a little bit of aluminum foil wrapped around here just to retain some of the heat. I don't like to generally totally wrap the vessels, just so that I can kind of see what's going on the bottom if need be. But in some cases I do wrap the whole thing, just to keep the heat more consistent and less stress on the glass. It helps prevent breaking glass. You burn a little bit less electricity heating it as well, which is a plus. And it also provides light shielding depending on what you're working with. But I'll take that off just so that you guys can see. So this here is actually spirit of wine that I'm further distilling. So what I typically do is I'll buy like a box of wine. They come in Canada in 4-liter boxes. and that to me is a pretty economical route to get my spirits. However, I have in the past also um, went to like a brew it yourself wine place where you basically purchase a box of wine concentrate. They ferment it on site for you. They do the yeast and all that, and then you show up once it's done and fermented and went through secondary fermentation. They've racked it, and you basically just bottle it at the end. And that is a less expensive option. I think you get, last time I went anyways, it was, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it was cheap. It was like half the price or less of buying it from the store. But you have a bit of a lead time on that, and a bit more time intensive. And the other thing with that is that I found the quality of the wine was not as high as what I was getting from the store, and I wasn't exactly confident with the alcohol content I was getting. It was kind of variable, and I just think on the whole less than what I was getting from store-bought wine. So, there's pros and cons there. If you're budget conscious, probably a good way to go. If you're not using that much spirit, maybe you can afford, or it's just better route for you just to buy it as you need it and in smaller quantities. And that's what I've been doing for a while, but I've done both options. It just kind of depends on where I'm at. So anyways, I will take one of these 4-liter boxes or a couple of bottles of wine if I go the other route, and I'll run them through a pot still first. So I'll put a photo up in the video of what I have. It's called a Mega Home water distiller. It's meant for distilling your tap water into distilled drinking water, which we use pretty regularly here in this house. But I happen to have 2 of them, and I will use that to do my first run of alcohol. And the reason being is that it's much faster to run 4 liters of the wine through that than it is to run it through, a 1 liter or a 2 liter laboratory flask through a distillation setup like this. This is not a real fast way to do it, but what the benefit of this is, you have a ton of control over the process, and your results are much cleaner. You're not going to overheat it. You can really watch the temperatures, and visually it's much more appealing to do. And if you're into communing with your work and the theurgical aspect of it, it can be helpful to have visuals on what you're doing. And I always find I enjoy distilling, so I like to do it with the glass. But essentially, I can take a 4-liter box, put it in my pot still, take the first liter or liter and a half of it, and now instead of starting at my 13% wine when I put it in my laboratory equipment, I'm more like 30 to 50%, maybe 40%. Either way, it gets me to a higher starting point. It just reduces the amount of rectifications I'm going to have to do down the road, and speeds up that whole process for me. Without taking away from this side of it, I still need to do rectifications and get a really clean spirit, but it just cuts a lot of that time off at the start for me. So that's what I do. Now, not everyone's going to have one of those. That's fine. You don't need it. You can start with this. You can start with just a basic retort if you want, but you need to have some kind of distillation apparatus as a minimum. That's a requirement. So, all right. So, why do we use alcohol to extract herbs in spagyrics? We use alcohol for a few reasons. One of the things is that it's a solvent. So it will readily pull oils and colors and flavors and most of the good things from the plant that hold the medicinal properties will come out with a solvent. Alcohol has a good kinship with plants, coming from the fermentation of plants, and it's a carbonaceous product. It itself has quite a bit of hydrocarbon content, as do the plants. So that there's a sort of kinship and relationship there between alcohol and plants, so it makes a good solvent. It's relatively safe ethanol to work with. Like as you can see here, my ventilation fan is off. A large amount of the vapor or the liquid is not good for you, for sure. You don't want to go chugging back a bottle of ethanol. You also don't want to be sniffing the fumes directly. but in moderation, it's pretty safe to work with compared to a lot of other things available out there as solvents, or if you're working with acids, strong bases, exotic chemicals. Like, this is a very safe way to get into laboratory work, whether it be for medicinal purposes or otherwise. The other great thing about alcohol, or we'll say spirit in this case, is that it can be used as like a transport medium. So for example, you could take a jar, fill it with your herbs, pour a strong spirit on it, incubate it for a period of time, and then pour off the alcohol through a filter. Now that alcohol has just transported the medicinal products or oils from that plant out of its original matrix, or the body of the plant, into its liquid body. Okay, so it's a transport medium, and that's essentially what extraction is transporting things through the medium of alcohol from its parent substance to a different area. And then, because it's volatile, you can actually vapor off the alcohol and be left with a pure oil. Now, when it comes to alchemy, quintessence or alchemic oils have to be treated gently, so it's not advised to heat them above 80 degrees Celsius, and ideally lower is better. So with the spirit of wine or pure ethanol, it usually distills around 76 degrees Celsius. So you're underneath that 80 degree mark, but not by much. So it can be used in that way. Typically for myself, when I do plant extraction, I'll extract the plant with the alcohol. I'll incubate it in a sealed flask for about a month, maybe longer. And when I'm happy with the amount of extraction that's happened there, I will pour off the alcohol through a filter, bottle, and use it. I don't usually tend to try to evaporate off the alcohol back to an oil. I have done that before, but I am always concerned that I'm bringing it too close to the temperature where it's going to kill the efficacy of the product. And so it's something to be aware of. Now on to the actual process here. So it's pretty simple. I'm basically just going to fill up my boiling flask with the impure alcohol, and I say impure because right now it has a lot of water in it. And I'm only filling it up about halfway, maybe even less. And then I'm going to heat it slowly. And the reason you want to heat it slowly is because it takes a while for this liquid to heat up, because of its it takes a lot of energy to heat it up to a boiling point, much quicker than the glass in the bottom can heat up. And so if you don't want to crack or break things, you just heat it up slowly. Usually a low heat on a hot plate works pretty well, low to medium heat. And eventually what will happen is, when the condensation starts going up and starts actually kind of refluxing up here, the temperature on this thermometer will shoot up very quickly within like 10 or 20 seconds to a boiling point. And I'm usually trying to run my distillations with alcohol between 75 to 80 degrees, so anywhere in that kind of range. 76, 78 is kind of perfect. My thermometer is not super accurate, that's why I say 75, because it doesn't read exactly. I've had it for a while and I know it's off by a little bit, but if it's anywhere kind of between 70 and 80 for me, I know I'm in the right range, and that's where I try to keep it. Now, this first run, because this one is a first run off the pot still, so there's a chance, like, if I don't sit here and watch it the whole time, it may go above that. It might hit 85, might even hit 90. When it gets to 90 degrees, the concentration of alcohol is quite low. I think it's around like 10% or something like that. So at that point, you're not making any gains, you're losing potency. So for sure, you want to cut it off on your first run by the time it gets to 85 degrees. But even better is to keep it under 80 if you can. Now, if you do let it go higher, the plus side to that is that you're going to capture more of the alcohol potentially that you can, but you're also going to have more water in your end product, which is going to make your rectifications more numerous and more time consuming. So usually what I'll do is I'll let it run until it hits 80, 78, 80. When the temperature starts going up, I'm not distilling azeotropic alcohol off anymore. Then I will take that receiver off, pour it into my rectification bottle, and I'll continue distilling the rest till it gets to 85, 90, and then I'll cut it off and I'll put that back in the original bottle. So I'm not wasting the alcohol, but it's not going into my rectified product, if that makes sense. I'm going to recycle it back into the process. Alcohol or ethanol makes an azeotrope with water in that it distills around, I think it's 78 degrees, maybe even 76 degrees, to maximum concentration of 96%, which means with just distillation you're not going to get alcohol to a higher percentage with water than 96%. So with this process you will get to 96%, but you won't get higher than that with just distillation alone, which we'll talk about in a minute, how you go beyond that. So essentially, yeah, I'm going to just do that process here. I'm not going to show you on video, because it's not going to look any different than this, except that you'll have some distillate happening here. It'll condense down on this side. When the thermometer gets above 80, I'll just shut it off. I'll decant that into my clean bottle here, and I'll keep doing that until I'm done my bottle of spirit, and then we'll restart that process. So as you can imagine, every time you run a rectification like this, you're going to lose a volume of your spirit because you're taking water out. So if I have a big jug of this, say I got a liter in here, but it's only 40%, and I run it through here and I get it that it's all 80%, well that's great, I got stronger alcohol, but I just lost half its volume that was water. So you're going to lose the amount you have every time, but you're going to increase the potency. And when it comes to doing spagyric work or extraction work, potency is, you want it to be as strong as possible, and you want it to have as little water as possible. So when I first started doing this with the plant process, I was following a book called The Alchemist's Handbook by Frater Albertus, and guys, I haven't read a lot of his works, but that book he has, which is, you know, pretty simple as far as what it shows you for beginners to get into, and I found it very useful. He had a process in there where he had you rectifying the wine 7 times. So if you do this process 7 times and you pay attention to what you're doing, you should have a pure, highly rectified spirit of wine at the end that can be used for alchemic extractions. However, there's another way you can get to pure extraction, and that's by using a drying agent. So what I like to use, which is, this isn't like a big mystery, a lot of people know to do this, is to use potassium carbonate anhydrous. And so let's say I ran my red wine through the pot still, and I got it to 35%. Then I run it through here, and I get it to 80%. Then I say, okay, well 80%'s getting there, but it needs to be more pure. So I run through here again, and I get it darn near that azeotrope. It's 95%, 94%, 96%. It's pretty pure. I might even be able to get a little bit purer than that, distilling it through here again, but it's darn close. Pardon my language. It's very close. And so at that point I say, okay, you know, instead of distilling another 3 times to get marginal returns, I'm going to add some potassium carbonate to that spirit I have in the bottle and let it sit for 24 hours. And I'm going to shake it once in a while. And what's going to happen is this potassium carbonate has a very strong affinity for water, and it has a very low affinity for ethanol. So if there's any water in that wine or in that spirit, the potassium carbonate will actually absorb it out of the wine, and you'll be left with a layer, if you let it sit, there'll be a layer on the bottom of your bottle of the salt water that's saturated at the bottom, and all the mostly anhydrous spirit will sit atop of it. So it basically makes a separation, pulls the water out of the ethanol, and then from there you can either decant it off, or as I recommend, you can distill it. You can pour that whole thing back into the flask, distill it off, and because the water and salt has a much higher boiling point than the ethanol, you'll just you'll only get the alcohol going over, and you'll have a pure anhydrous alcohol at that point that can be used for your extractions. So that's what I recommend. If you want to take it a step further, you can take that dry alcohol you just distilled, and you can put it back in a dry boiling flask, and make sure all your apparatus is dry, like oven dried, so there's no moisture. And you can then put more anhydrous potassium carbonate in the boiling flask, and distill it again, and you'll get a spirit of wine that'll come over at a lower boiling point. Which gets back to that whole issue of if you're going to vapor off your spirit, off of your oil, you don't want it to go above 80 degrees Celsius. That's where you can take advantage of that, to do that. And I'm pretty sure the reason for that is because if you react anhydrous alcohol against a strong base like potassium carbonate or potassium hydroxide, you end up getting with what's called the conjugate base of alcohol, which is actually ethoxide. It's not ethanol anymore, and it has a lower boiling point. So the more you do that, the lower you can bring down the boiling point, and it will work better for vaporing away off of your extracts. But that's overkill. You don't need to do that for spagyric preparations. It's just something that nice to know. The only thing I'm not showing in this right now is my pump. I've got a little aquarium style pump here which pumps the water into this inlet. It goes up the jacket and out this side. I threw a little block of ice in there just for the demonstration. You don't need it for ethanol because like in the basement here it never gets above 17-18 degrees Celsius, so that temperature, just the room temperature water is cold enough to condense the ethanol quite well. But it never hurts if you're concerned about losing the very volatile, which is the most active part of the spirit. Then just throw some ice water in there, and you'll be in better shape for distilling faster and not losing anything. I use a vacuum takeoff adapter because I like to put a drying tube on, usually. So here's a drying tube. Now mine's a little bit jimmy rigged, we'll say. But it's basically a standard glass drying tube. I've got a piece of cotton ball at the bottom in this little expanded part, then some potassium carbonate, and then another piece of cotton ball. And then I've just taped on, because there's a smaller glass stem here, I've taped on a piece of latex tubing. And what I can do is I can just take that, and I can put it right over the spigot here. Okay. And then what happens is when I'm doing my final rectifications where I want absolutely anhydrous alcohol, that allows the pressure still to release from my apparatus. But if I go to turn off the heat, or for some reason I get a vacuum where air wants to go back into the apparatus, the potassium carbonate in there will suck any moisture out of that air, and I won't end up getting a contaminated spirit having water in it that I don't want to have in there. So it's basically just a way to keep my my distillation as water free as possible. And so I don't typically use it on my first run, because I know I'm not going to have a perfectly water-free product anyways, and the amount that comes in that way is so minuscule that I'd rather just keep my drying tube nice and dry until I actually need it, which is going to be on my last run, maybe my second last run, depending how anal I want to be about it. So yeah, so that's basically the process. It's not super exciting. It's good to keep an eye on it. I've been doing this a lot, so sometimes I'll set it up, make sure it's running well. I'll go upstairs. I got family and I got kids and a wife, so like I don't want to, especially if they're home or whatever, I don't want to be sitting down here all night watching this thing. But there are some risks. You're dealing with alcohol. It's flammable. There are things can break and things can happen. So like if you're gonna do it, just you got to keep an eye on it, right? So usually I don't leave it for more than a few minutes unattended, but I try to just either distill when I have more time, or later at, like, usually right now everyone's in bed, so this is my time to come down here. I know I'm not uninterrupted, I can keep an eye on it. But what I'm getting at is that's not, you could run upstairs and say hi or grab something, it's not a big deal, but you gotta, just keep an eye on it. So, with that being said, I've never had any sort of lab accident with ethanol. Knock on wood. Not saying it can't happen, but it's fairly safe to work with if you respect it and you're not rushing through things. So, right. So for tonight, that's all I've got, I think, for this video. I have the wine bottles here just to show, like, this is just a bottle of red wine. This is your first kind of stage. And then once I'd run that through, I'll end up with something like this, which is a clear spirit. This would be like called brandy, basically. This is essentially brandy. It's not pure. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's probably somewhere between 30 and 50, if I had to guess, but probably closer to 30. And then this bottle actually is now in the distillation train. This had been run through, I think, one time after the pot still, so this is on its second distillation. But this is the one I'm going to keep the good product in because it's just it's a better quality bottle. It's borosilicate glass. It's got this nice, I think it's polyethylene seal on it with an actual silicone liner, and it's not going to leak anything. So this is the one I'm going to keep the better spirit in. And then I have another wine bottle hidden away somewhere with absolutely dry, like perfectly rectified spirit of wine. And I kind of tend to use wine bottles for this usually because they have a nice little seal, and you're buying wine anyways to either to drink or to distill. So I usually have a few bottles laying around, and they work pretty good for storing ethanol. I don't know if I keep it in this for like years and years, but usually for me, I'm distilling it as I need it. So I don't usually keep pure anhydrous ethanol on hand for more than a week or two at the most. But I do often keep brandy, I like to have a full bottle of this kind of all the time, so that if I decide I want to extract something, it's an evening or two of concentrating it, and then I can use it for my spagyric work. So, all right. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.